Okay. For those joining this live stream, we are talking about some language completeness and consistency issues for Wolfram Language. For those of you who are just in a meeting about image and audio functions, this is a bunch of different kinds of things. All right, let's get started. Okay, first up, we have norm. What the heck is happening with norm? Okay. Oh, real norms.
Right.
I thought we just had a function that did, what is the function that does?
We don't.
Real but we
have real abs.
Yeah,
yes.
So real abs is for vectors, is that right? Or
no, real abs is for numbers. It will thread over the list, I'm pretty sure.
So what does it do? What does real abs do? If I say I, what does it do?
It will just return unevaluated.
Okay. What is it for again? That's for the case of
that's really for the case of symbolic X, and you want it to be right. It's so when you differentiate real abs of X with respect to X, you get.
Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. This is the error. Could somebody?
I can report that.
Yeah, this needs to be reported to Roger like immediately because I want to make sure that machines that I'm about to take on a trip in a couple of hours don't have this problem.
Okay.
It's like a Packlet update problem. Oh, for goodness sake. Well, whatever. Okay. So what you're saying...
right. So if you put in real abs of X and then you differentiated that with respect to X, you would get a piecewise constant.
I see. Okay. So this is for differentiation. Okay. So what you're saying for norm, what is the point for norm?
Okay, so right. So the point is, right. So, and it's not necessarily just norm. So we have, right. So right now, if you do norm of XY, you get, right, you'll get absolute value of X squared plus absolute value of Y squared. And maybe you want to just get out X squared plus Y squared. Right.
You mean the square root of X squared plus Y squared?
Yes.
Right. So you mean, and so for example, if I differentiate that with respect to X, I get that.
Right.
And arguably, so what if I want to get real abs here?
So
does that not make sense? Real abs is not necessary because it could just be X squared, right?
Right. Well, so that is one of the issues.
Because for this norm, that makes sense. But if I say, how do I get the what does that do? Yeah, okay. So that does that.
So you do want real abs in that case.
Indeed. Right. So, and I can get crazy things like that too.
Right.
Now, when do you not want real abs in the case for norm?
When the norm is an even integer. Well, okay. Well, so there's a question.
It's if P is a rational with an even numerator, you can avoid the real abs.
Right. Now, one of the issues is, and I think there might be a typo there, that's a 1 rather than an I.
In what?
So under the last bullet point, there's a point. It's right. There's an example there. Norm of 1 comma a new option goes to true. Right. Right. And there's a question of, so suppose you want the real, this new option, and you evaluate norm of, 1 comma I. Do you want something that returns unevaluated, or do you want 0?
Yeah, I understand.
My claim is that if you do that, then it's no longer a norm.
It's norm-like.
Okay, by the way, got a bunch of background noise. If somebody wants to stop, mute themselves. Okay. All right. So the question is, there are two questions: whether to get real abs, like in this case here, we might want real abs of x cubed. And second, in the case of even powers, even numerator powers, do we want to get rid of the absing altogether? Am I making sense?
Right. If we just stick in real abs everywhere, then I don't think there's much of a question. Well, I mean, there's a little question of do we return just the answer with abs replaced by real abs, even though there's an I in there, which we know doesn't make any sense, or...
Well, I'm not talking about that complicated case. I'm just talking about the simple case.
Okay.
Well, okay. So in the case of numbers, okay, what are the cases? Okay, the cases are 1, numbers, subcase, real numbers. Right?
Right. So if all the numbers in it are real numbers, then none of this matters.
Okay. So all irrelevant.
Yep.
Okay. So next case is symbolic.
Yep.
Right? And there, the main point is, beauty of expressions, so to speak.
Yep.
Plus differentiability. Is that correct?
Right. And we can, now that we have real abs, we can separate those, right? Because we can get real abs, which will give us differentiability, even if, at least in some case, even if in the default case, which is, the even, the 2 norm, it's, not as beautiful as it could be.
Yes, I understand. But it will get the right answer.
Correct.
Because real abs prime is equal to 0 or 1.
It's plus or minus 1, depending on whether x is positive or negative. Right.
So it's a piecewise. Yeah. Okay. Fine. It turns into piecewise. Okay. All right. So I get it. This somewhat bizarre case of complex numbers. Okay. So, I mean, to me, it almost seems like the thing should be called abs function, arrow, abs, identity, or real abs. I mean, that's kind of being very direct.
But it's not only abs, it's conjugated as well. Try, for example, projection of list xy, comma, list uv.
Ugh.
So we were hoping to have a single solution that would eliminate all those conjugate.
Well, but you do agree that there are two cases here, the case of identity or the case of real abs. What would this do in the real abs case? Is there an analog of real abs here?
In this case, no, because projection is unique to the 2 norm, because only in the 2 norm case is it an inner product space.
Okay. Let me look at the argument structure. I mean, so what you want is something, I mean, in other functions, we say comma reals, for example. That isn't distinguishing between the real abs and the nothing case. But that would be the case that we would, to select what you're talking about here, right? You could have have said here, norm of, list, comma, 2, comma, reals. That would have been the analog of what we would do in the case of, let's say, solve.
Right. Now, adding this optional argument doesn't work so nicely for normalize, because normalize takes a function in the second argument rather than a number. So this is why we were thinking it should be an option.
Oh, boy. But if it's an option here, surely it should also be an option in solve and so on. And because in let's say in reduce, right?
Right.
In reduce, we have a third argument, which is the domain.
Right. Right, which is slightly different because right there it's actually changing, even if they're sort of, even for numeric things, right? Because if you want to solve x squared equals -1 over the reals, it's going to tell you there's no solution.
So why isn't, it so happens that this thing can barrel ahead and get to an answer in all cases, in the case of norm, right? I don't see that there's a big difference there. I don't see how we can consistently not use
the other disadvantage for this to being an optional argument rather than an option, right, is that you'll need to put in the 2 in order to get the reals.
I agree, which is not beautiful.
But it's actually not. I've argued before when you had a branch where you put them in a list that since a number P is completely distinguishable from a domain, you could actually just maybe not document, but allow the syntax norm of lists, comma, reals. And it's unambiguous.
Is that true for all of these functions? Like normalize, for example? I think it's probably fairly unambiguous.
Well,
I'm not so sure, but norm, clearly it's unambiguous.
Okay, and what this would do is it would drop the conjugates, it would drop the abses, and there would be no way to get a real abs there. Because you just don't care about the real abs. Is that true? You do care about the real abs for this case.
Right. So it would it could potentially drop the real abs in the case where, right, you have an even numeric.
Yeah, right. But in this case, what it would do is it would replace those abses by real abses.
Right. And it would return presumably unevaluated or with a ridiculous sort of real abs expression if you gave it 1, comma, I.
Your choice. I don't have an opinion about that one.
I think unevaluated would be better.
Okay.
Okay. Listen, my take is, are there any other functions implicated other than norm and normalize at this time?
Potentially something like standardize. Try standardize of ABC.
Euclidean distance. What would you like to do with Euclidean distance?
Well, it would need to be an option or an optional third argument.
Yeah.
Right. So you had norm, normalize. There's also orthogonalize.
That's a horrible bluff.
Mm-hmm. Or presumably the projection as well.
Yeah. Or
yeah.
in statistics, there is also variance.
Right. And from projection, you also get orthogonalize. Right. And
okay, look, whatever we do here, we should also support in reduce. Okay, so if we have an option here, you know, we have an assumptions option already for many things, but it requires explicitly laying out what you want to, you know, A as an element of reals and things like this, right?
right.
Yeah, the one advantage I see of, say, an assume reals option is that we could actually have $1 assume reals.
Right. That was
Default
yes,
false, and that would be the default check for the option. And then somebody really wanted to work in reals, they could just set that. And
yeah, but it's not going to work. And you know, we have 1,000 functions where that doesn't work.
yes, I know.
So I mean, that's just silly, if I might say so. I mean, you know, it's promising something we can't deliver.
True.
And I personally, I'd like.
Well, I mean, there are 1,000 functions that ignore assumptions, right? And yet we still document and use assumptions a lot. So
Why don't these functions have assumptions, like norm?
I guess.
Oh, for goodness sake, this bug is killing me. I mean, an interesting possibility would be to say that assumptions could just say reals. In other words, to allow the possibility to just say assumptions are reals.
Up till now, assumptions has always been a Boolean valued expression. So
Exactly.
that's quite a break.
On the other hand, it's very obvious what it would mean, and it's a convenient form of assumptions.
Right. Well, if we're going to start talking about changing assumptions, then we should have Adam here, and he's currently away.
Yeah, I'm a bit more worried about propagating assumption to many places. Because right now, the way to do this is more like assuming and you put expressions inside. But it's not that many functions that have assumptions options.
No, I understand that. But I'm suggesting that there's not a good excuse for why norm doesn't have an assumptions option.
Oh, norm in particular, okay.
Right, but I don't think, I mean, possibly, but I don't think, if norm takes an assumption option, it should be treated the same as any other place.
Yeah.
And I don't know that.
Okay, let's
sense.
Cut to the chase of what we can do right now. I think these third argument cases are okay. We should inventory all of them to make sure there are no horrible problems. I think that's something we can support. I think adding an option that we will need to backpropagate and to solve and reduce and so on is iffy right now. But I think we should talk to Adam and those guys about whether they're prepared to have such an option. I think it is worth considering assumptions, generalizing that. I think that, but I think it's not inconsistent. I don't think there's a problem because what we will be doing with reduce is saying you can have the reals domain argument, or you can have the assumptions, or you can have whatever this assuming option is.
Well, the solving reduce reduce or solve over the reals is not the same thing as the same function, assuming all the variables are real valued.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Yes, I understand.
Right, which is, sort of why this case is a little bit different, because we're sort of we're allowing sort of intermediate things, and we're just sort of stating, let's assume that these guys are, things which aren't obviously complex are assumed to be real.
By the way, I assume that if I had if I say norm f of whatever, it will assume that every symbolic expression that appears is real. Right? So if I were to say norm of, f of x, g of y, right? It's going to assume that that's just f of x squared plus g of y squared.
Right.
So it's assuming that every element of the vector is real.
Yes, it pretty much has to do that.
No, I understand. But that's different from... Whereas reduce might... If reduce was done... Yeah. Yeah.
But the assumptions is different in that if you had an assumption on X and you knew something about F, then it could determine that F should be real and act accordingly.
I just don't think we can have an option here because it's going to promise something it absolutely can't deliver in other parts of the system.
Right. So, I mean, this is would be abusing a assumption, abusing the name of the option, but and maybe we can come up with a better name. But so sort of one of the suggested option names at the top was conjugated goes to true or false, which certainly this handles the two norm and standardize and projection and all those guys. What it doesn't handle is, the one norm.
I think it's utterly obscure. And I also worry that very name is going to be needed in chemistry and all kinds of weird stuff.
Okay. Right. But fine. So we need to come up with a better name, but possibly, a name that was sort of more that.
But I think the way people will think about this is, I just want to assume that everything is real. I mean, I do think that's what people want to do. Okay, what is the objection right now to adding the third argument to norm?
Well, in a lot of places, it's, it doesn't make any sense, right? In normalize, it doesn't make sense unless the second argument is explicitly a number, which I don't know if that's currently supported, but was going to be one of our enhancements as we were working on this, that you can put a number in the second one, and that means norm with that number. Right,
but this doesn't help your argument, because if it doesn't make sense with an arbitrary f there, then the option doesn't make sense with an arbitrary f there either.
But options don't have to make sense for every possible thing. There are lots of options that don't affect all possible combinations of arguments.
I understand. Well, the same is true of some arguments. He says, not being able to think of an immediate example.
So for normalize, you could just use f as, function of norm of slot, comma, 2, comma, reals.
That's really obscure.
Which is obscure.
Right.
I mean, I would say the amount of use of normalize versus the amount of use of norm is small percentage.
Right. And I guess, and I suppose I would worry a bit about having a domain-like argument, because we might want actual domains there, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we can.
When will we want actual domains?
Well, right. I mean, if you have a matrix and you want its norm in this matrix group as opposed to that matrix group. I mean, this is
in the norm case.
Yes, in the norm. Well, norm or normalize. Yeah, that's not something I think that extends as naturally to things like projection or whatnot, right? Because projection, really, you have to be an inner product space, and so.
All right, listen. Let's get a list of all functions that care about this. 2 things, okay? All functions that care about this right now, and all functions like reduce that might in the future care about an option that says assume everything is real.
Okay.
I mean, I think there are even plenty of other functions, like our famous, x to the power 1/3. Assume everything is real. What does it mean? That's our cube root thing, and so on. But let's start off, and my tentative conclusion is that we should have another argument for norm. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, should we go on to the next issue?
Yep.
Okay. Is this a can of worms?
But it's necessary.
I think it's simpler than it looks.
Yeah.
Okay. The worms are very, I don't know what. I won't say the worms are edible.
They're not particularly slimy.
Okay, good. Okay.
So I think the summary here is that Rob needs some changes in total for his optimization project. And in the process, he's fixing a bunch of ugly things in total.
Okay. So let me ask a couple of questions. So in what aspects of total is stupid? Oh, that's absolutely stupid. That is absolutely stupid.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely stupid and shouldn't be that way.
I don't know. Total of 2 pi equals 2 plus pi. That makes sense to me.
Itai, you're not saying that in any serious way.
I am not. That was a joke.
Stupid.
Right. So if you look at if you have a prototype build and you open the if you open the source notebook, you'll see tentative notes and some examples.
Okay. By the way, we got a bunch of background noise. If we could try and cut that out, it'd be great.
Right. And so we have this pre-existing option that hasn't been documented and which you wanted to be renamed. And this is a case where the new name doesn't make sense. So that's sort of the issue. It's really the name of this option and how exactly we want to proceed with it.
But this note has to be removed, right?
Right. That will be removed once, this is merged. And
so that is ultimately an incompatible change, but one that I cannot imagine anybody has relied on because it's so bizarre.
Right.
Basically, I made the change in the sources, and we only found a couple of test failures in the whole test suite. And the example that uses this is just absolutely ridiculous and stupid.
Is it from the wild example or is it a made up example?
It basically somebody gets the total derivative order by doing total of derivative of blah blah blah. Which is it's just a made up example.
Okay. Have we looked at demonstrations and things like that?
I have not.
Somebody should do that. Okay.
And there will be a way to recover that old behavior using this allowed heads option.
No. Got a lot of background noise here. Okay. Heads up elements inside of list sparse. Okay. Automatic or inherited for that one. What does allowed heads do in other cases?
So it's not documented, I don't think.
It's not documented yet. It works, I think, in array, queue, and array depth. and
kind of sort of in transpose, but not really.
Yeah.
Okay. Isn't there an effective allowed heads for things like the simplify function? Doesn't that have some kind of allowed forms type thing?
I don't think so. I mean, it has, the transformation functions, right? You can.
Something has this. Excluded forms. Okay, different. We got a bunch of background noise. Could we please try to cut it out? I think that this should be automatic and this case should be inherited. Am I making sense? Everybody's on mute. It's only the person who was walking around who needed to be on mute.
Yeah, inherited is fine. But I think, automatic then maybe should be the default, which is list and associate.
That's what I just said. Did you hear me say that?
I thought you were pointing to the list and saying that should be automatic. Sorry.
Oh. Well, how do you get the default with the current thing?
Well, you have to tell it just works, or you type.
No, that we should make the default case should be automatic. I agree that list could be. I somewhat reluctantly agree that list could be list sparse array, structured array. Okay. What about data set?
I don't think total works with data set now, except as a normal expression. That's a completely different project.
Well, no, it's not a completely different project. A data set is effectively a list of associations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, well, then if it works with association, it'll work with data set.
I don't know. You got to try it. Okay. What? We got to figure out how to adjust this audio because it's really it's like, who is
it does work with data set right now.
Okay, fine. So what does it do? What does it treat as an allowed head?
Well, I think it's just going inside and working as it would work with associations and lists.
Okay.
Right, but only if the data set is at the topmost level, because it's implemented via an up value, like everything else in data set.
Okay.
So yes. So this is the point we wanted to discuss.
Oh, you mean the other thing was uncontroversial, and this is the only part that's controversial?
Well, you at one point we talked about documenting allowed heads, possibly once we've actually cleaned up some of the implementation, but you didn't like allowed heads and insisted it should be renamed array allowed heads, except that name doesn't work in this case. So it's only controversial if you still object to allowed heads.
Why did I object to it before? Because I was saying it doesn't work on non-arrays anyway.
Because I think the previous uses we were thinking of were all related to arrays, like in...
Right. The previous uses really were array related because they were depth, they were transpose, and transpose absolutely positive. Depth, you can maybe argue whether or not it has to be array, but transpose, it absolutely positively has to be an array.
It was array depth.
Array depth.
Exactly.
Okay, so the question is whether array depth could have other random heads lying around that are not arrayed. I think it's all right. I mean, is there a problem? Is there an obvious problem with that?
No, I very much favor using allowed heads because it's more usable in other functions like total.
Yeah. Okay. But so array depth, I see. Allowed heads here with inherited would take the top level thing and force that and say how many levels down it is. Well, yeah. Okay, I get it.
Which is the current behavior.
Okay. Sounds okay to me. Allowed heads is fine. Should we go on to the next item?
Yes, just to confirm. So then the basic case of list only, that's called list, or is it called automatic?
No, that should be called list.
That's list. Automatic is list or association, or list things or associations.
I see.
Right. Well, yeah. So yes, an automatic. I mean, I suppose the question. I mean, should automatic mean the same thing in all? Should it be the default in all heads, and should it be?
I'm sorry. The default in all functions.
Yes, in all functions.
I don't know. I don't think it has to be the same in all functions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right. We'll work that out. But yeah.
Automatic could mean different things for different functions.
Yeah.
Right.
Fine. Okay. Okay.
Right. So this is working. Yes. So we have these three pretty functions ready for you to see. With nice rough pages, and they work.
Diagonal matrix does work in a far higher rank tensors. True or not true?
I don't think that's true.
For what higher? No, this is matrices.
I see. So if I want to make a diagonal tensor, by the way, Rob, you are implicated in this weird background noise. Now he's gone. Okay. So how do I make a diagonal tensor? Using a sparse array construct, using structured array, or what is the approach? And it doesn't make any sense to have diagonal Q work on a diagonal tensor. I mean,
right. So yes, and of course, I mean, one of the issues is that sort of right if these arguments would need to be changed, right? In the second, it's still featureized. So.
Well, no. I was just doing lower triangular matrix. What is lower triangular? How do I get?
There's lower triangularize.
Triangularize?
Yes.
Probably.
Gosh. It's been there for ages.
Right.
7.
So
antique. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, right. And one of the issues is that the concept of the diagonal, right, it's no longer, the second argument will no longer be a number. It'll be a list of rank -1 things.
I'm sorry, what are you talking about? For which?
For diagonal matrix and diagonal matrix Q, if you, the second argument, which specifies which diagonal, right, that's no longer a number. That's a list of rank -1 numbers. I guess in short, I'm arguing that these should all be matrix specific. And if we want a generalized function, we can have.
I don't think it's worth having a generalized function because I think by the time you're doing this with a tensor that has a single stripe through it somewhere, that you'll want to do that with sparse array.
I agree with that, Stephen. I think that's right.
Right. Yeah, me too.
By the way, why doesn't this refer to structured array here or sparse array?
Because it hasn't been touched since version 7. Well, I guess that explains structured array. I don't think that explains sparse array, but it probably should. We can add that,
okay.
or you can add it now.
Now let me know that.
All right. If you want to look at the futurized rough pages for these 3 functions.
Yep. Well, arguably, one should have the Q version of this as well. You know, is an n by n diagonal matrix, blah, blah, blah.
Maybe, right? Right. The point of that one is you can specify fewer than n elements, or will that also truncate? No, it says pads, right? So the point is that
Well, I assume that it would truncate I assume that n is the winning thing.
I'm not sure that's true.
We should check it.
Yeah.
No, n should be the winning thing, but the more interesting case of that is the second to last note, where you can create a rectangular matrix.
Okay, so I would argue that diagonal matrix Q should have the complementary set of arguments.
But Stephen, that doesn't make sense, because if you truncate or pad, it's still diagonal.
I think I agree with Rob. So this would look like check only a subset of the matrix. For example, if n is smaller than the dimensions of the matrix. And that's something we don't do anywhere else.
I see. Okay.
Like checking only for...
I was thinking, but okay. I don't understand. I was thinking it was a double test of test both for diagonalicity, so to speak, and for size. But you're telling me that that's...
We really don't have tests for size. The only thing that implies size in a test is square matrix Q.
Okay, fine.
I believe, and typically you can do size as equal dimensions, blah blah.
Okay, fine. Okay, let me see here. Okay, it looks okay. Yeah, these look fine to me. I mean, I'll just look at one of these. I mean, it's kind of annoying that we have to have a whole function just for this functionality, but I guess it's, I think it's less obscure than having some kind of, it's like rotate left, rotate right. It's kind of annoying that you have to have two functions, but otherwise you'd never remember which one was which.
Right. And they're certainly sufficiently discussed concepts that they're worth having.
Yes. Okay. All right. Let's have a quick look at information. We're over time here. Inspect. Oh boy. Token information? It's like it's a token of it.
No. Well, so right. So if you insist that this new function be called information, stealing the old information, then we need a name for that old function. And my suggestion is token information, because it can take either a symbol or an operator. But so I mean, there's I suppose we can argue about those specifics, but there's sort of one sort of general point here, which is, this is sort of the extent of the functionality that's been implemented, and we can, do some graphic design, but sort of in terms of something, a radical redesign of the function itself, of the functionality. I don't think, that's not in the cards for 12, given the other things that Nick needs to work on.
Yeah, and I think this is perfectly nice, what you have here.
Okay.
This is perfectly useful. And why is it that you want to break off the token case?
Well, my point is that information is currently a function. So if that's not a prototype build, and you type in information of plot or information of the string plus, you will get...
if it is a prototype build, you're saying?
No, if it's not.
I want to see what it does in a prototype build.
Information about the symbol. Yeah.
Well, that does that, and I don't know what happens if you give it the string plus.
Okay, so meanwhile, that is in comparison to that less than beautiful output. So what is the argument here?
So my point is that that needs to exist since it has existed since version 1.
Well, let's look at this case. Oh, sploffle, raffle.
Give it a string containing plus.
You mean the symbol, the character plus?
Yes. Oh, yeah, so that actually works. That's nice.
Yeah, with the string form of them, because we didn't want the argument or the new function to be held. The idea was you can use the string form to reference function names or variable names without having to have a hold wrapper holding around them.
Yeah, so Nick is saying if in your in of 12 there you change that to the string XX, it should give you something.
I'm not thrilled about the values structure there. I think it should be more elegant. But
yeah, there's a basic cleanup pass for the formatting code. So for system symbols and things defined in Packlets, we don't show the down values in those forms, but exactly how we want to nicely typeset down values and up values for user-defined functions isn't super well mapped out.
Hey, there's a comment on the live stream that's interesting, which is, how come diagonal matrix Q doesn't take a second argument, which is like this test argument here? Or does it?
It does not. And it's not clear what sort of test you might want there.
Well, what it does take as a second argument is the position of the diagonal.
Right.
I think we have discussed this in the past. The problem is that we have now very many X matrix Q functions, and none of them takes a test. So the idea was that each of these new functions would test for some property of the matrix, and the test would be reduced to matrix Q itself.
I could also argue that if you wanted to do the test, presumably on the diagonal elements, you could do, test of diagonal or vector Q of diagonal of matrix, comma test.
Yes.
And actually, I think furthermore, it would be ambiguous whether the test was being applied to the diagonal elements or the non-diagonal elements. I mean, we could make it clear, but I would have to read the documentation every time I used it to remember which was which.
All right. That's a reasonable argument. I agree. That's a reasonable argument. Okay. Anyway, useful comment, though. Okay, back to this. I really like the name information. So this will not have been used programmatically. I mean, it will have been used
Well, every time you do question mark.
Which we could change to using this one here.
No.
Why not?
Because question mark, first of all, needs to work nicely in a standalone kernel, and it's hold all. And no,
okay, hold on. We got multiple different moving parts here. Okay, question mark does not have to map to information of blah.
Right. So, for example, in xkernel, if you do question mark of plot, it still refers to the old function, which we temporarily in xkernel renamed symbol information, which is a name eType doesn't love because it doesn't always refer to a symbol. And that's sort of where token information came out of.
What does it refer to other than a symbol?
Operators.
That's wild.
It's been there for as far back as I can run kernels.
I'd have loved to know that 10 years ago.
Yeah, we can try to. I finally got a version 1 running on a Mac SE30. It will use up probably 2 megabytes of memory trying to figure that out. Okay. Okay, so there's nothing fundamental. Okay, so the functionality in xkernel, other than maybe some graphic design of those gray boxes, seems perfectly nice.
Okay.
And uses the name information. So what we are missing is the explicit name of what question mark turns into.
Right. Or possibly an alternate name for information. And
I love the name information for this. I think. I mean, inspect, I don't buy at all. Just isn't the right thing. I mean, it's, you know, it's just information on the thing.
Why do you not buy it at all? You're asking for properties of this blah.
Because we're not using inspect for anything. I mean, inspect is much more like a debugger type thing. You know, this is when we say information of an entity and things like that, it's really not inspecting the entity. Inspecting the entity would be looking inside at the canonical forms and so on, whereas this is really information about the entity.
I don't think this does anything with entities.
The current version does.
What's this?
Oh, it does. Okay. I guess I was remembering some old version which didn't.
I think information is the right name. So let's go back and look at the question mark case. Okay. So you're saying we need a programmatic way. We need a full form for question mark plot. I mean, isn't question mark plot a special input form that doesn't even have a full form?
No.
So you mean
it has to parse. It goes through the loop. It has to parse.
Okay, so if I say something like this,
that may not work in a note. That doesn't work in a notebook because of, I would argue, a front end bug, I think, but it would work in a standalone kernel.
A little bit, but originally in version 1, question mark was a special input form that question mark at the beginning of a line, like exclam at the beginning of the line was a shell escape. Question mark at the beginning of the line was a help escape, so to speak. That was the original intention.
Mm-hmm.
We got background noise and typing, guys.
Well, hasn't been true in 2 decades.
Really?
Really.
Okay, so if I go to a standalone kernel here.
Mm-hmm.
Could we typing, please? Typing, don't type. Great. Okay, so question mark plot. Hardly beautiful, but functional, I guess. Actually, that's more beautiful than I ever remember it. How does it do this? Why is it doing the subscripts like that?
And the third line doesn't look good. The subscript I's are shifted over too far.
Well, there is a bug.
That's because the dots aren't monospaced.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which is
and there's also a known bug where it counts when it's doing the alignment. It's counting the number of bytes rather than the number of characters. So if those dots are
Unicode,
2 or 3 bytes, then the spacing will be off.
This is coming out as a side effect.
Yeah.
Right. This is a mess. I mean, yeah. This is from the time of floppy disks. Could we please cut out the typing? Could you please put yourself on mute if you are typing?
Could we call the old symbol legacy information?
You could call it.
Yeah, look, yes, it's possible, but I mean, it doesn't even have to be in the system context, does it? It's never going to be seen. People are not going to use it as a, Sandra on the live stream is suggesting info, which we did think about before, but I like information. I think it's, I mean, it's a hack. We could call it info, but I think the problem that we have is that we have not well maintained this. Okay, let's look at this again for a minute. What it is it's really doing. Is this a side effect here? Anybody know the answer to that?
Well, it's basically printing it, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, and that is a syntax error.
Yes.
Although you believe it shouldn't be.
Yeah, it's open to debate, but yeah, it's really a relatively minor point that nobody.
How would you feel? And to me, this would make a lot of sense if question mark at the beginning of a line did something more like this. In other words, because that's equals at the beginning of a line, and now we're off in a different world. And we are able to just, happily process things in a different way. And to me, putting a question mark at the beginning of a line.
Well, I mean, changing the graphic design is fine. That doesn't change the fact that it, needs to parse to something in order.
Well, this doesn't. I mean, this parses to Wolfram Alpha date, Wolfram Alpha of that string.
Well, that's still parsing to something, right?
Well, fair enough. Fine. But I mean, this could parse.
Which then evaluates.
Yeah. Does this evaluate? Is this going through the evaluation?
Yes. Look, your ins are being incremented.
Boy, that's wrong. See here, if I do this, wow, the ins are being incremented there too. But that's the kind of thing that I thought question mark was doing here. Get what I'm saying?
Right, and it's not. Not anymore.
I wonder when that was changed. More than 20 years ago, you said.
Right. My guess would be version 3 when, it had to, be sent over mathlink from the front end to the kernel in boxy form. But I could be wrong.
All right. What does it say on the documentation page for information? Prints information about a symbol. The input escape. Oh boy. Do you see that? This is a different, no. But first of all, it says input escape. But second of all, it's saying it's the input escape question mark, which raises the question, what does a single question mark do?
It's information with the option long form equals short false or something like that.
This is really ancient. It doesn't even document long form up here, which is another bug. All right. Okay, listen. I think information should be changed to its modern form. It should remove the hold all attribute. I think question
mark, which Roman noticed, by the way, when we added it to prototype, he sent an email complaining about the fact that information wasn't hold all anymore. So at least one person noticed that. But
what about the possibility of info? I don't like it. I just don't like it.
Details?
No, we went through this last time. We spent like half an hour last time looking at the different possible words, and information is the right word. You know, info is kind of like a possible hack word, which I don't particularly like. Does anybody particularly like info here? Would you like to try to justify it?
I find it confusing if we keep information.
Oh, it's terribly confusing. All right. So, okay. All right. Why do you want to keep this form of information? I mean, getting the printout in a terminal is easy. We can easily turn this thing to print out in some more civilized way. And we need that, by the way, because these other information things, we need a standardized way to print these summary blobs on the terminal.
Because it's something I use all the time. And I think people...
What's something you use? I'm sorry, what will you use? Question mark, whatever, all the time?
Yes.
Right? In the terminal front end.
And in notebooks.
Okay, fine. I'm not saying we get rid of question mark. I'm saying, okay, we've got two issues. One, this looks different from this, okay? That's partly a graphic design issue. I don't know, I think somewhere between these two is probably the perfect form of that summary blob. Am I making sense?
Right, and it's hold all, so I can easily do it on symbols without knowing whether or not they have own values.
Okay, that's a different objection. You're using information to do that, right?
What do you mean using information to do that?
No, you're using the function information with an unevaluated symbol. Or are you using question mark?
Either way, it's hold all.
No. What are you actually using in practice? Question mark.
Question mark.
Okay, fine. All right. Now notice that we could easily make question mark deal with the unevaluated issue. For example, if question mark simply turned that into a string, it would immediately deal with the unevaluated issue. Yes, and it will also deal with the /@ issue.
So would the idea be to have... I was wondering if we have some sort of option for legacy form that if you really want the old version, it's
That's
there.
a question of formatting. We changed the formatting a few years ago and there wasn't a big outcry. But I'm telling you, we need a compromise between these two kinds of formatting.
Right. And I guess regardless of the formatting functionality, there is a use case that question mark gets used for, which is looking for wildcard patterns and symbol names. So plot asterisks to get a list of symbols.
Magnificent. Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, by the way, yes, that's fine. The thing you guys are missing is the mapping from the question mark form to information does not have to be, just take this argument and stick it in the first argument of information, right? If there is a wildcard form there, then by all means, we can turn it into something which can successfully wildcard things. I agree that that's useful.
Yeah, so I guess the thought I was having that I didn't articulate well is if we don't have a good name for what the old form is there a case to be made that information can be called with an option that says, give me the old version of information.
Good, but I mean, information would also be useful to probably support wildcard strings.
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Whatever question mark does, I don't see why we shouldn't allow information to do the same thing for a wildcard string. Am I making sense? So that this would be equivalent to information of P star.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a problem with this. I think this is just going to work. I think the mapping is question mark turns into information of the string, whatever comes after the question mark. The single question mark, double question mark issue has to map on to some option, some theme option to information. Am I making sense?
This actually works now.
What works?
Evaluate that, what you just wrote. Oh, well, in the previous version.
In this version?
In a current version, not the...
Right.
Non-X kernel. Yeah.
Right. Of course it does, because that's the same thing as question mark P asterisk.
Okay. Listen, I think we are converging on something perfectly reasonable here. We've got some graphic design modification to make to merge these two designs. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then we've got question mark turns into information of the string following the question mark.
Which, at least in a standalone kernel, is what it already does.
That's fine. And meanwhile, the other piece is that these summary blobs have to come out reasonably in a standalone kernel.
Right. I mean, right, there is a fair amount of, nice functionality associated with these printed forms, which I don't know how nice.
Let's not lose it. Let's try to not lose it. I mean, in worst case, the thing can just say, am I in a terminal? If so, do the old thing.
I'm not talking about terminals, right? You can click on those symbols right now, right?
Great.
Click on it, right? And so, I mean...
Well, it actually did something totally crazy here. It just destroyed my notebook.
That's weird. I've never... Oh, well, there's a bug in if this is...
Yeah, it's a 12.0 prototype.
Yeah, and there's actually was a bug with cell locating functions and this. Yeah, there we go. Right. So in this case, the sense that it's
this is pretty cruddy. Why isn't that generating the why isn't that showing the usage messages? This may be a bug in my build, which must be fixed.
Right.
I can see that also.
I'm sorry?
I see that problem in the last build I downloaded. So it's not only your build of 12.
Okay. Roger is reporting that documentation layout is missing in builds for 12, but that's irrelevant to my 11.3.
Okay, so it seems like question mark already auto-stringifies its argument. So, right. So, I mean, we'd only be breaking people typing in information and finding that it's no longer hold all. If we just.
All right, fine. I think we've got a resolution, and I think we need a graphic design meeting to go through how to merge these looks. And I think otherwise this is resolved and very nice. And now we should just support information for more and more kinds of objects, and we can get rid of things like classifier information and so on.
Yep.
Right. I mean, I will just note, right, the auto-stringification means that the question mark form can only ever work with symbols and operators.
What else would it work with?
Well, I'm just saying, if people think that information is the same thing as question mark, and they try to type in question mark entity open bracket blah.
Let's not worry about that. Let's not worry about that. But I think I personally favor in the future that question mark at the beginning of a line should do something more like equals sign. Okay, that could go into something which has, for example, all kinds of autocompletes and all kinds of wild things. Okay, I can imagine, for example, a fat. I can imagine that in this case it would be, it would give some kind of fat autocomplete. That already has documentation here because it knows that you're in a documentational mode, if you get what I'm saying. Because right now you're just typing code, but it knows that you're trying to look for information about sign. So it might as well generate the one line summary of sign right here in the autocomplete.
Yeah, but what if you're on your way to cinch? I'm not sure I understand your suggestion.
No. I'm suggesting it does it for all of them, right?
I see.
That it becomes a fat autocomplete, just like, the menu at the top of our website is fat. Or like Wolfram Alpha, has fat autocomplete.
I see.
Actually, I think Wolfram Alpha fat autocomplete only fattens the top entry. And so you have to mouse down to see the fattening of the lower entries, which I think is fine. Since autocomplete tries to sort by, the most frequent first. All right. I think we've come to a great conclusion here. I think we are, we can wrap up here.
Okay.
Okay, but we will need a follow-up design. Sushma, can you pick that up?
Mm-hmm.
Follow-up design meeting. Looks good. Well done. All right. Thanks to folks on the live stream. Some useful suggestions, much appreciated. And thanks to the people, the live people, as opposed to live. I don't know what it's. I would say in real life, but that's not right. And I don't know what the heck the non-streamed people. Thanks. Okay.
The talking people, the orally talking people.
Yes, that's right. The talking people. Yeah. Okay. Voice channel people. That's a good term. All right. See you all soon.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.